"Finish it, white man," said the Apache, not knowing he had just saved her from the trap. The sun stood high over the desert, pale and sharp, turning the land into a wide sheet of light and dust. Nothing moved except the wind. It slid across the sand and dry grass, whispering through rocks and low hills, carrying the smell of heat and old earth. In this quiet place, a small group of people stood facing one another, as if time itself had slowed to watch them. The white soldier stood a few steps away from the others. His boots were covered in dust, and his uniform felt too tight in the heat. Sweat ran down his back, even though he tried to stand still. He held a rifle in both hands, just as he had been trained. His fingers knew the shape of the metal, but today it felt heavier than ever before. In front of him knelt an Apache man, his wrists tied, his shoulders straight despite his injuries. His face showed signs of struggle, yet his eyes were calm. They did not beg. They did not plead. They only watched. The soldier noticed this right away, and it unsettled him more than shouting ever could. Nearby stood a young woman, her hands bound as well. Dust clung to her dress, and her hair was tangled from travel and fear. She had been taken during the confusion of the clash earlier that day. No one had asked her name. No one had asked her story. She stood quietly, trying not to draw attention to herself, but her eyes moved quickly, taking in every detail. She knew this land was not safe, and she knew that the moment unfolding before her would decide more than one life. The officer in charge cleared his throat. He was older, hardened by years on the frontier. To him, this moment was only another task to finish before moving on. He gave a short nod toward the kneeling man. "Do it," he said. His voice was flat, as if he were talking about fixing a fence or loading supplies. The soldier swallowed. His mouth felt dry. He had followed orders before. He had done many things because someone told him they were necessary, but this moment felt different. The Apache man was not fighting. He was not running. He was simply there, breathing, waiting. The Apache lifted his head slightly and looked straight at the soldier. His voice when he spoke was quiet but clear. "Finish it, white man." The words cut through the dry air. They were not angry. They were not weak. They sounded almost calm, as if he were stating a simple fact. The soldier felt his hands tremble. He had expected curses or silence, not this steady acceptance. For a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow. The soldier could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear the wind. Everything else faded. The young woman felt a tight knot form in her chest. She did not fully understand the language, but she understood the tone. She understood finality. She wanted to close her eyes, but she forced herself to keep them open. She had learned that not looking could be just as dangerous as looking too much. The officer shifted his weight, growing impatient. He did not like delays. Delays led to questions, and questions led to doubt. "What are you waiting for?" he snapped. The soldier raised the rifle slightly, then paused. Something felt wrong. He did not know why, but the feeling was strong. His eyes moved, almost on their own, scanning the rocks and hills behind the Apache man. The land looked empty, but the Apache's gaze had not been on him alone. It had flickered again and again toward the rocks. The soldier frowned. He had spent months on this land, learning to read it, learning that stillness did not always mean safety. His training told him to focus, to complete the task. But his instincts whispered that this moment was not as simple as it seemed. The Apache man noticed the hesitation. His lips pressed together for a second, then relaxed. He said nothing more. His message had already been given. The woman noticed it too. She saw the way the Apache's eyes moved, how his body seemed tense not with fear but with awareness. She felt a strange sense of hope mixed with confusion. Why would a man facing death be watching the hills instead of the rifle? Earlier that day, everything had happened too fast. There had been shouting, running, confusion. She had been traveling with people she trusted or thought she trusted. Then the clash came, and suddenly she was alone, hands bound, moved from one group to another like an object instead of a person. She had learned not to speak. Speaking had not helped before. Now she stood here, feeling the weight of the sun and the weight of fear pressing down on her. She knew that if the shot came, something else would follow. She did not know what, but she felt it deep in her bones. The soldier's finger rested near the trigger, but he did not pull it. His mind raced. He thought of home, of the quiet fields where he had grown up. He thought of why he had joined the army, of promises made about honor and duty. None of those thoughts helped him now. "Sir," he said carefully without lowering the rifle, "something's not right." The officer turned sharply. "Don't think, just act." The Apache man breathed out slowly. The soldier saw his chest rise and fall. A living man, not an idea, not an enemy on paper. A man who understood this land far better than any map could show. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound. It was so small that most people would not notice it, but the soldier did. A scrape, a movement that did not belong to the wind. His eyes widened slightly. The Apache spoke again, softer this time, almost as if to himself. The soldier did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. It was not fear, it was warning. The woman's heart began to race. She felt it before she understood it. The silence felt stretched, thin, ready to break. The officer opened his mouth to shout again. And in that stretched moment, before any sound shattered the air, before any choice could be taken back, the soldier finally understood that this was not only about obedience or mercy. It was about seeing what stood right in front of him and what waited just beyond sight. He tightened his grip on the rifle, not to act but to steady himself. Whatever was about to happen, he knew one thing clearly now. This moment was a test. And not everyone present knew they were being tested. The soldier did not lower the rifle, but he did not raise it either. His arms ached from holding it in the same position, yet he stayed still. The silence around them felt heavy, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The officer stood behind him, growing more tense with every second that passed. The soldier's eyes kept moving. He looked at the rocks again, then at the dry ground, then back at the Apache man. The man's face showed no fear, only patience and something else the soldier could not name. It was as if the man already knew how this moment would end, even if the soldier did not. The young woman stood quietly, her hands tied in front of her. She kept her head slightly lowered, but she watched through her lashes. She had learned to do that. Looking too bold could bring trouble. Looking too weak could do the same. She stayed in the narrow space between. The officer stepped closer. "You're wasting time," he said. "We can't stay here." The soldier nodded without turning. "Yes, sir." But he still did not move. Another sound drifted through the air. This time it was clearer, a faint clink like metal touching stone. The soldier felt a chill run through him despite the heat. He had heard that sound before during long marches and sudden skirmishes. It was not a sound the wind made. The Apache man's eyes flicked again toward the hills. His shoulders tensed slightly, though his hands were bound. He took a slow breath, steady and controlled. The woman felt her stomach tighten. She could sense that something was wrong even if she could not see it. The air itself felt different, sharp and alert. The officer frowned. "What is it now?" he asked. The soldier hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Sir, I think we're not alone." The officer scoffed. "There's nothing out there." The soldier did not answer. He trusted his instincts more than words. He shifted his weight just a little, angling his body so he could see more of the rocks without turning his back on anyone. The Apache man finally spoke again, his voice low but firm. He said a few words in his own language, then added in broken English, "Not safe. Not for you, not for her." The officer's jaw tightened. "Enough," he said. "He's trying to distract you." But the soldier noticed something else now. The Apache man was not looking at the officer. He was looking past him toward the woman. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with concern. The woman met his eyes for a brief moment. In that glance, she felt something she had not felt since she was taken. Recognition. as if he saw her not as a burden or a prize, but as a person in danger. Earlier, before the clash, she had sensed trouble. The men traveling with her had spoken in low voices, stopping when she came near. Their plans had felt heavy with secrets. When the confusion started, she thought help had arrived. Only later did she realize she had been moved from one danger to another. The soldier's grip tightened on the rifle. "Sir," he said again, more firmly this time, "we should move her away from here." The officer turned sharply. "After this is done." The Apache man shook his head slightly. "If you do it," he said, nodding toward the rifle, "she won't leave this place." The words struck the soldier like a blow. He looked at the woman again. She stood very still, but her eyes were wide now. She did not speak, but her fear was clear. The soldier took a step back, just one. The officer noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" the officer demanded. "Sir," the soldier said, choosing his words, "if there's danger out there, we should face it together, not stand still." The officer's face reddened. "You're letting him get into your head." Maybe he was, the soldier thought, or maybe he was finally listening. Another sound came, closer this time. A low murmur like voices carried on the wind. The officer froze. He heard it too now. The Apache man straightened as much as his bonds allowed. "They are close," he said. The woman's breath came faster. She knew those voices. She had heard them before, whispered at night, spoken with false kindness. Her fear turned sharp, focused. The officer raised his hand, signaling the others to be alert. The soldier lowered the rifle slightly, not away but down, ready for something else. The moment had changed. It was no longer about an order. It was about survival. From behind the rocks, a figure moved. Then another. They did not wear uniforms. They did not call out. They moved with purpose, confident and quiet. The officer cursed under his breath. "Positions," he hissed. The soldier stepped instinctively toward the woman, placing himself between her and the movement in the hills. He did not think about it. His body acted before his mind could catch up. The Apache man watched this, his eyes sharp. He nodded once as if confirming something to himself. The figures emerged more clearly now. There were several of them. They carried weapons and wore expressions that held no surprise. This was planned. The soldier understood that at once. The woman's heart pounded. She recognized one of them, the man who had smiled too much, the man who had said she would be safe if she cooperated. She wanted to shout to warn them, but her voice would not come. The Apache man spoke again, louder now. "They came for her," he said, "not for me." The officer stared, trying to make sense of it. "What do you mean?" The soldier's mind raced. The pieces began to fit together, the staged clash, the confusion, the woman's quiet fear. This was not a rescue, it was a trap. The soldier felt a surge of anger, sharp and hot. He had nearly carried out an order that would have left the woman helpless, alone in the middle of this. One of the men from the hills stepped forward. "Hand her over," he called, "and no one gets hurt." The officer raised his weapon. "You don't give orders here." The man laughed softly. "You think this is about orders?" The Apache man shifted suddenly, moving faster than anyone expected. He leaned forward, throwing his weight into the soldier's legs, knocking him sideways just as a loud crack split the air. Dust burst from the ground where the soldier had been standing. Everything erupted at once. The soldier rolled, heart racing, understanding in a flash that the Apache had just saved his life. He came up on one knee, lifting his rifle, no longer shaking. The woman cried out as chaos filled the desert. She stumbled back, still bound, fear driving her to move even when her legs felt weak. The officer shouted commands, trying to regain control. Shots rang out, echoing off the rocks. The attackers scattered, moving with practiced ease. The Apache man, still bound, lunged toward one of the attackers who came too close. He struck him hard, sending him stumbling back. The soldier stared for half a second, stunned by the strength and timing. Then he moved. He ran to the woman, grabbing her arm gently but firmly, pulling her toward cover. "Stay low," he said. His voice was steady now. She nodded, clinging to his words like a lifeline. Behind them, the Apache man fought not with anger but with purpose. Every movement was meant to create space, to give them time. In the midst of the noise and dust, the soldier understood something clearly for the first time. The man he had been ordered to end was not his enemy. And the woman standing beside him had nearly been lost to a danger no one had bothered to see. Dust filled the air, thick and choking, making it hard to see more than a few steps ahead. The desert that had felt quiet and still only moments ago was now alive with movement and noise. The soldier's heart pounded in his chest as he pulled the young woman behind a low rock. He crouched in front of her without thinking, placing his body between her and the open ground. "Stay here," he said softly, even though everything around them was loud. "Don't move unless I tell you." She nodded quickly, fear shining in her eyes. Her hands were still tied, her fingers numb, but she pressed them against the rock, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her breath came fast and uneven. She had been in danger before, but never like this. This time escape felt close enough to touch, and that made the fear sharper. The soldier peeked around the rock. Shapes moved through the dust. Some wore uniforms like his, others did not. It was hard to tell who was where. He forced himself to slow his breathing, to remember his training. Panic would help no one. Behind him, he heard a sharp sound, then another. He turned just in time to see the Apache man stumble and then regain his balance. Despite his bound hands, he was still fighting. Not wildly, not with anger, but with careful movements, using timing instead of strength. The soldier felt a strange pull in his chest as he watched. The man had no reason to protect them. He had every reason to run if he could. Yet he stayed, placing himself in harm's way to give others a chance. The officer shouted orders, his voice strained. He was trying to bring structure back into the chaos, but the plan he had relied on was already broken. This was not the simple task he had expected. The men attacking from the hills knew the land well. They moved from rock to rock, appearing and disappearing like shadows. The woman pressed her back against the stone, her eyes fixed on the soldier's face. She was watching him closely now, reading his expressions the way she had learned to read danger in people. When he glanced at her, she saw something new there. Determination. Not duty. Not fear, choice. A loud sound cracked nearby and the soldier flinched, then steadied himself. He leaned closer to her. "When I say run," he told her, "you run straight that way, don't stop, don't look back." She swallowed. "I can't," she whispered, glancing at her tied hands. The soldier looked down, then quickly reached for the rope. His fingers worked fast, pulling and twisting. The knots were tight, made to hold. He cursed under his breath, then forced himself to slow down. Rushing would only make mistakes. Across the clearing, the Apache man saw what the soldier was doing. He shifted his position, drawing attention to himself. He shouted something loud and sharp in his language, his voice cutting through the noise. One of the attackers turned toward him, anger flashing across his face. The Apache moved just in time, dodging aside. Even bound, he knew how to use his body, how to keep moving so no one could get a clean strike. Each second he held their focus was another second the woman had to be freed. The soldier finally felt the rope give way. He pulled it loose and tossed it aside. "You're free," he said. The woman flexed her hands, feeling blood rush back into her fingers. Relief flooded her, so strong it nearly made her dizzy, but there was no time to rest. The danger was still all around them. "Not yet," the soldier added. "Wait," she nodded, trusting him now without question. A sudden shout rose from the other side of the clearing. One of the attackers had gone down. Another retreated behind a rock. The officer barked more orders, his voice rough. The lines between sides blurred. It was no longer clear who was winning, only that no one was safe standing still. The Apache man stumbled again, this time falling to one knee. The soldier's heart lurched. Without thinking, he stood and fired toward the rocks, forcing the attackers back. He had broken many rules already. At this point, he did not care. The Apache looked up at him, surprise flickering across his face. Then he nodded once, a small gesture filled with meaning. The woman watched this exchange, understanding more than words could explain. These two men, raised in different worlds, had made the same choice. To protect life instead of ending it, the soldier glanced around, judging the distance. "Now," he said to the woman, "run." She hesitated for half a second, fear freezing her legs. Then she pushed herself up and ran. The desert felt endless, each step heavy, her lungs burning. She ran not knowing where she was going, only knowing she could not stop. The soldier watched until she was halfway to the next rise, then turned back toward the fight. His hands were steady now. The doubt that had weighed on him earlier was gone. Whatever happened next, he knew he was doing the right thing. The Apache man struggled to his feet again. One of the attackers rushed him, confident that the bound man was finished. The Apache stepped aside at the last moment, causing the man to lose his balance. The soldier moved in, using the opening to drive the attacker away. For a brief moment, they stood side by side. The soldier could feel the heat of the sun, the dust on his skin, the weight of everything that had happened in the past hour. He glanced at the Apache man, seeing him clearly now, not as an enemy, not as a problem to be solved, as a man who had chosen courage. "This ends now," the soldier said, more to himself than anyone else. The officer regrouped what remained of his men. He looked around, taking in the scene, his face pale. The confidence he had carried earlier was gone, replaced by shock and anger. "Fall back," he shouted. The attackers began to retreat as well. They melted back into the hills, slipping away as quickly as they had appeared. The dust slowly settled, leaving behind a quiet that felt fragile and unreal. The soldier lowered his weapon, his arms suddenly heavy. His body trembled now that the danger was passing. He leaned against a rock, breathing hard. The Apache man sank to the ground, exhausted. He rested his forehead briefly against the earth, then looked up again. The officer approached, his expression hard to read. He glanced toward the direction the woman had run, then back at the Apache man. His mouth opened, then closed. For once, he had no immediate words. The soldier stood straighter, meeting the officer's gaze. He expected anger. He expected punishment. Instead, the officer looked away. Minutes passed in silence. The desert returned to its earlier stillness as if nothing had happened at all, but everything had changed. Far in the distance, the woman reached the rise and turned back. She could barely see the figures now, small against the vast land. She placed a hand over her chest, tears slipping down her face. She was alive. And she knew she would never forget the moment she had been seen, protected, and given a chance to run. Back in the clearing, the soldier looked at the Apache man once more. Their eyes met, and in that shared glance was an understanding deeper than words. This had never been about finishing something. It had been about choosing not to. The quiet that followed felt strange, almost unreal. The wind moved again, gentle this time, brushing dust off the rocks and carrying it away. The echoes of noise had faded, leaving only the sound of breathing and the far cry of a bird. The desert looked the same as it had before, wide and calm, but everyone standing there knew it was not the same anymore. The soldier lowered himself onto a rock and wiped his face with his sleeve. His hands were still shaking, not from fear now, but from the release of it. When danger had filled every second, he had moved without thinking. Now that it was gone, his body remembered everything at once. The Apache man sat on the ground a short distance away. His shoulders sagged with tiredness, but his eyes stayed alert. The rope still hung loosely around his wrists, cut but not fully removed. He did not ask for help. He simply waited. The officer stood apart from them, staring out toward the hills where the attackers had vanished. His jaw was tight. He had built his life on clear lines and simple rules. What had just happened did not fit into any of them. After a long moment, the officer turned back. His eyes moved from the soldier to the Apache man, then back again. "You," he said to the soldier, his voice low, "come here." The soldier rose and walked toward him, every step steady. He expected sharp words. He expected blame. He had already accepted whatever would come, but the officer did not shout. He spoke quietly instead. "Explain." The soldier took a breath. "Sir, they weren't here for him. They were here for her." The officer's brow furrowed. "How do you know?" "Because he warned us," the soldier said, glancing toward the Apache man, "and because she recognized them." The officer looked over again. The Apache man met his gaze without fear or challenge. He looked tired, worn, but firm. The officer sighed, a sound heavy with more than exhaustion. "Cut him loose," he said at last. The soldier did not hesitate. He walked over and knelt beside the Apache man, carefully removing the remaining rope. The man watched him closely, then flexed his hands once they were free. "Thank you," the soldier said quietly. The Apache man nodded. "You listened." That simple answer stayed with the soldier. He realized how rare it was to be thanked for listening instead of acting. A little distance away, the woman had slowed her run. She had reached a safer place, but she did not feel calm yet. Her legs felt weak and she sank down behind a rise, hugging her knees to her chest. She listened, straining to hear anything from behind her. When no sounds came, she finally allowed herself to breathe deeply. Memories flooded her mind in broken pieces. The way she had been watched before the clash, the smiles that had felt wrong, the soft promises that had not matched the eyes of the men who made them. She understood now what the Apache man had seen long before anyone else. After some time, the soldier appeared over the rise, moving slowly, his hands visible. "It's safe," he called gently. She stood unsure, then stepped forward. When she saw him clearly, relief washed over her again. She nodded, unable to speak. They walked back together toward the others. With every step, she felt stronger, as if each breath rebuilt something inside her that had been breaking for days. The officer watched her approach, his expression unreadable. When she stood before him, he cleared his throat. "You're safe now," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. She looked at him steadily. "I wasn't before," she replied. Her voice shook, but she did not look away. "They planned it, the clash, everything." The officer stiffened. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" She gave a small, bitter smile. "No one asked." The words landed heavily between them. The soldier felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at himself and everyone else who had failed to see what was right in front of them. The Apache man spoke then, his voice calm. "She knew," he said, "but knowing does not help if no one listens." The officer closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. Something in his expression had shifted. Pride, perhaps, or certainty had cracked. "We'll escort her," he said finally. "All the way." The woman nodded, but she did not thank him. Her gratitude was reserved for the man who had warned them and the one who had listened. As they prepared to move, the soldier walked beside the Apache man. "You could have run," he said, "when everything started." The Apache man looked at the horizon. "Running would not have saved her," the soldier nodded. "Why help us?" The Apache man considered this. "Because I have seen what happens when no one does." They walked in silence after that, the meaning of those words settling deep into the soldier's thoughts. The journey back was slow. No one rushed. Every sound was examined, every shadow watched. The woman stayed close to the soldier, not out of fear but out of trust. She knew he would not ignore her now. As the sun began to dip lower, the land softened in color. The harsh light faded into warm tones and the heat eased. It felt like the world itself was exhaling. When they reached a point where paths separated, the officer stopped. He turned to the Apache man. "You're free to go," he said. "There will be no report." The Apache man studied him for a moment. Then he nodded. "Some things do not need to be written." The officer watched him walk away, his figure slowly blending into the land until he was gone. The soldier felt a tightness in his chest, knowing he might never see him again. The woman stood quietly, following the man's retreat with her eyes. "He saved me," she said softly. "Yes," the soldier replied. "He did." As night began to fall, the group continued on. The stars emerged one by one, bright and steady. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the cool air on her skin. She was tired, but she was alive. The soldier walked beside her, his thoughts heavy but clear. He understood now that obedience without thought could be just as dangerous as open cruelty. He understood that courage sometimes looked like hesitation, like listening when others demanded action. Behind them, the desert erased their tracks, just as it always did. No sign of what had nearly happened remained, but inside each of them something had changed. A truth had been revealed, not through orders or force, but through a choice made in a single moment. And that truth would follow them long after the desert faded into memory. The road ahead stretched long and quiet, marked only by faint tracks in the dust. The group moved at a steady pace, not rushing, not stopping for long either. The danger had passed, but the memory of it walked beside them. Each person carried it in a different way. The woman felt the ground beneath her feet with every step, as if she needed proof that she was truly moving forward. The sky above had turned a deep blue, scattered with stars that looked close enough to touch. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, not because of the cold, but because she was still learning how to feel safe again. The soldier walked a short distance ahead, scanning the path and the land around them. His body was tired, but his mind was clear. He had not felt this way before. There was a calm in him that did not come from following rules, but from making a choice he could live with. The officer followed behind, quieter than usual. He no longer walked with the sharp certainty that once defined him. His thoughts were heavy, filled with questions he had never allowed himself to ask. He realized that authority meant little if it could not protect the innocent. They reached the settlement just before dawn. A few small buildings stood together, lights glowing faintly in the early morning. Smoke rose from a chimney, carrying the smell of bread and firewood. It felt like another world compared to the harsh desert they had crossed. When the woman saw the lights, her legs nearly gave out. She stopped, pressing a hand to her chest. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear now, but from relief so strong it hurt. The soldier noticed and slowed. "We're here," he said gently. She nodded, unable to speak. She took one step, then another, until the ground felt solid again beneath her feet. People came out to meet them, drawn by the sound of approaching footsteps. Faces filled with concern turned to surprise when they saw the woman. Questions were asked, but quietly, carefully. Someone brought her water. Someone else offered a blanket. She accepted these things slowly, still unsure how to receive kindness without suspicion. But each small act helped. Each one reminded her that not everyone looked away. The officer spoke with the local leader, explaining just enough to ensure her safety without drawing attention. He chose his words carefully, leaving out names, leaving out blame. Some truths did not need to be spoken aloud to be understood. The soldier stood aside while this happened. He watched the woman sit near the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup. The light softened her features, easing the tightness in her face. She looked tired but alive. After a while, she looked up and saw him watching. She gave a small, uncertain smile. He returned it, feeling something loosen inside him. Later, when the sun rose fully, painting the land in warm gold, the time came for them to part. The woman would stay there, at least for now, until she decided what came next. She stood before the soldier and the officer, holding herself straighter than she had the day before. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. The soldier shook his head. "You don't have to." She turned to the officer. "I hope you remember," she added softly. The officer met her gaze. "I will." She believed him, not because of his rank, but because of the way he spoke now, without pride or defense. As she walked away toward the building, the soldier felt a strange mix of peace and sadness. Their paths had crossed for only a short time, but the moment had changed all of them. They left soon after, heading back the way they had come, though the land felt different now. The desert no longer seemed like an enemy. It was simply a place where choices had been made. Hours later, as they rested near a dry stream bed, the soldier found himself thinking of the Apache man. He wondered where he had gone, whether he was safe, whether he ever thought of that moment again. "Sir," the soldier said quietly, breaking the silence. "Do you think we'll see him again?" The officer looked out at the horizon. "No," he said after a moment, "but I don't think we're meant to." The soldier nodded. He understood. Some people entered your life only to show you something important, then disappeared back into the world. When they returned to their post, life continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Orders were given. Duties were assigned. Reports were written that spoke of weather and travel and nothing more. There was no mention of the Apache man's warning, no mention of the woman nearly being lost. The paper stayed clean and simple, but the soldier knew that what was left out mattered more than what was written. At night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment when the rifle had felt too heavy to lift. He realized now that the weight had not been the weapon itself, but the choice it represented. He also realized that listening had been the bravest thing he had done. Weeks passed, then months. The memory of the desert faded for others, but not for him. He found himself watching more closely, asking questions, noticing small signs others ignored. The officer changed too. He spoke less, listened more. When orders came that felt wrong, he paused. Sometimes he even questioned them. The woman built a new life slowly. She found work, then friends. She learned how to sleep through the night again. Some days were harder than others, but she carried with her the knowledge that she had survived because someone had seen her worth. Sometimes, when the sky was clear, she would step outside and look toward the distant land. She did not know the Apache man's name, but she spoke a quiet thanks into the wind anyway. Years later, the soldier would still remember the words spoken that day. "Finish it, white man." He finally understood what they had meant. They had not been a surrender. They had been trust. Trust that someone would see beyond fear and orders. Trust that someone would choose to protect instead of destroy. History would not record that moment. No book would mention it. No monument would mark the place. But one life had been saved. And another had been changed. And sometimes that was enough.